We are live.
Hey there, I have a question for you. I'm going to share a quote with you, and I want you in the comments to tell me whether or not you believe this is actually true. Does this really happen? Now, this quote is something that we shared in the 6th episode of the Queer Money podcast. It's a quote from Jim Rohn. If you're not familiar, Jim Rohn is a very well-known motivational speaker from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he said this. He said, when you know what you want and you want it bad enough, you'll find a way to get it. So what do you think? Do you think that's true? Do you think that when you want something and you want it bad enough, you'll find a way to get it? It's an interesting question. It's an interesting quote, but it's also an interesting question as to whether or not we believe we're capable of getting what we want.
We're the architect of our destiny, similar to what we talked about yesterday.
Right. Yeah. So again, this is we're doing a Queer Money follow-up on episode number 6 of the Queer Money podcast, where we talked about our number one question to our success. So what happened when we started thinking about our debt is we started to ask ourselves some questions as to why we got into debt. And we started to dig into really what was going on in our lives. And I think that was the impetus of this conversation that we had during this podcast. And what was interesting, it was interesting to go back and listen to it, I think partly because it reminded me that maybe we don't ask ourselves this question often enough.
No, I don't. I don't think we do, and I don't think most people do. I think we're not a whole lot different from most people, and we kind of were just going through life unconsciously. This is very similar to what we were talking about yesterday. We were going through life unconsciously, and then suddenly we had this epiphany that we were at $51,000 in credit card debt.
I wish it was an epiphany. It was a rough conversation.
It was selective ignorance.
Yeah, it was. It was.
And I don't think a lot of people ask that. Fortunately for you and me, is that we hit sort of a rock bottom, and we hit that rock bottom together, and so we could work through it together. And then we were both in the same space, same frame of mind, where we were starting to say, why are we living in a basement apartment despite being both of us earning middle income salaries in financial services, white, and cis, and having pretty much everything working in our favor? And why were we in $51,000 in credit card debt? Why did it seem like everybody was passing us by? What were we doing? Clearly, we were doing something wrong. And so we started to ask ourselves the questions of, why are we here? What is our goal? What's most important to us? What are we fucking up here?
Right, yeah.
And, I don't know that a lot of people, what that does, I think, is when you realize that nothing is going your way, you have two options. You can either blame external forces, which I think is, as humans, we're prone to do, or you can look inside and see, to what extent am I in control of my circumstances? What have I done to get me to this particular place with which I'm not happy? And fortunately, you and I were at that space at the same time, and we were,
right.
We were taking personal responsibility, and we realized that we weren't living according to our values. And the reason for that was that we didn't really know what our values were. Right. We were just kind of hopping along unconsciously. And it wasn't until we figured out what was most important to us that we were then able to start to live our lives accordingly.
Right. It was interesting. You just made the comment that we clearly were doing something wrong. And I think the reality is that we weren't necessarily doing anything wrong. We just weren't taking the steps in the right direction to get what it was that we wanted. I mean, when you look at the vast majority of Americans, more than 50% of American households have significant credit card debt. More than 50% of American households are struggling and living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly 50% of people say that they wouldn't be able to come up with $400 cash to pay for an emergency. And it's not that we're doing anything wrong. It's just that we are doing what everybody else is doing, and that is just living an unconscious life, just going after whatever it is feels good at the moment.
Well, and I think to be fair, we were living, and I think lots of people today are living a minimum payment lifestyle.
Yes.
You don't think that you have a credit card problem if you can make the minimum monthly payments. You don't own your phone, you make minimum monthly payments in perpetuity now.
Right.
You don't own your furniture, you finance that. You don't own your house, you finance that. You don't own your car, everybody leases them nowadays. Whereas at one point, leasing was considered like the worst thing in the world to do unless you were a salesman and your company paid for a car for you.
Right.
Then you would lease it. So we've all become addicted to these minimum monthly payments, and as long as I can afford that $20, $50, $300 minimum monthly payment for my credit card, then then my credit card debt, regardless of what the balance is not a problem until it becomes a problem, such as I lose my job, or my credit score drops precipitously, or something adverse happens to me and I don't have any emergency savings and have to rack up even more debt, and I totally drop my credit or increase my credit utilization.
Yeah. What was so interesting about this is I think that one of the things we asked ourselves, and this wasn't necessarily the actual question that we asked ourselves, but I think it got us on the path
Right.
to this, and that was, why are we waking up every day? I mean, why do you wake up every day? Do you wake up every day so that you can go to a job to pay the bills that you have to pay because of the stuff that you bought? Is that really why you want to live? No, we don't want to live because of that. But for whatever reason, lots of us find ourselves in that state of waking up every morning, getting ready for work, going to work, coming home from work, having dinner, watching TV, going to bed, waking up the next morning, going to work. It's just this repetitive process over and over and over again. And a lot of that has to do with this. And it was interesting because on episode 5, the one with Chad Nash, the one we talked about yesterday, was he mentioned that so many of us are bogged down with the lives we have because we just have too much stuff, or we try to have too many experiences. It doesn't have to be stuff that can drag us down financially. Sometimes it's the experiences that are dragging us down financially. And all of that means that we just have to keep on working, and we don't ever really get to enjoy our lives. And that's why I think what was starting to happen to us, we're like, whoa, wait a second. We can decide. we
have a choice.
We can choose to decide what kind of life we want.
Well, I think that all stems from the system, the country, our society is set up a certain way. And so we're told that we have to go to school and graduate and get our diploma. And then after that, unless you want to be a second-class citizen, you have to go to college and you have to get your degree. And then you go ahead and you get a job in corporate America because you need to have, apparently a job, a W-2, is the definition of stability, even though you can get laid off or fired at any time, like many people are learning during COVID. And we're told that this is what responsible adults do. Then get married, then buy a house, then have children, and that is the definition of happiness. And we're yeah.
Time out. That's not what I want.
And I think what people very often learn by their mid-20s to mid-30s is that, you know what, this recipe, I think most people are thinking, I'm not happy. Something's not working out right. There must be something wrong with me. So give me a Xanax. But I think if people thought about it, they would realize that they're trying to live up to everyone else's expectations, and this particular recipe does not make them happy. And I think that's why we're seeing a growing number of individuals who are on antidepressants, a growing number of people, especially in the LGBT community, who are addicted to drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, and all these stimulants to try to take the edge off. I mean, we all know that feeling of having that first drink is the best drink, right? Because it takes the edge off. But then it's always the second and third drink that we are too uninhibited to say no, we don't need that.
Right.
But we feel like we have to have this all the time because we're not happy. And I think I would argue that most people aren't happy because they're not living the life that they want. And I think having this particular podcast after we talked with the podcast that we did with Chad Nash is very interesting, because there was a man who sort of saw himself as the architect of his life, decided he would live the way he wanted, and said, I don't care what society or anybody else says. I'm going to go travel for an indefinite period of time, ended up being up to 36 months, and I'm going to go see some parts of the world that many Americans would say you can't go to because that is such a dangerous and scary place. You'll never come back alive. And he proved all that wrong and has had, how many experiences to show for that.
Right. So what was it that we really asked ourselves?
So, well, we wanted to figure out what was most important to us, why were we spending the way we were, and how should we spend? What were our values? Because when you know what your values are, you can spend accordingly. And then that's the true definition of happiness, because your money is going to the things and the experiences that matter most to you. Up until we realized what what we really wanted, we were spending money on going to happy hours, going to parties, going to clubs, on designer clothing, on expensive dinners, happy hours that lasted longer than an hour, traveling, always on credit card, because we could afford it until we came back, and we came back with a credit card hangover, and then we regretted going on vacation altogether. And it wasn't until we realized that we wanted to save for a comfortable retirement, so we had that financial security. We wanted to travel much more extensively than we had it up until that point, but we wanted to do it with cash. And we wanted to be able to give back to the LGBT community, but to not do it in such a way that while we were helping the community or helping someone else, we weren't also hurting ourselves.
Right. One of the things that I think that really kind of became clear is that we were searching for the true, what do I really want, or what do we as a couple, what do we really want in life? And how do we get there? First of all, it was deciding what do we really want in life, and then the second thing is how do we get there. And when we went back and listened to, or I went back and listened to this podcast episode, I thought it was interesting. We kept on weaving in this whole idea of elite athletes and how they make the decision to get what it is that they want. And the one that we kept on kind of referring to were the Olympic athletes, because I think many of us refer to Olympians as elite athletes because they are performing at such a high level that they are basically considered the best in the world at what they are doing. And we kept on talking about and referring to Michael Phelps, and clearly he knew what he wanted. He wanted to win a gold medal. And I think probably at one point he went from wanting to get to the Olympics to winning a gold medal to being the best swimmer that ever existed. And it's clear that he had to make some decisions in his life to be able to get there. No one would ever accuse Michael Phelps of having the privilege of being the body and motivation that he has to get in the pool and swim, and just got there by accident, or it was easy for him. No one would ever say that it wasn't without effort. I mean, clearly you see what this man did, getting up at 4:00 in the morning and swimming for hours, and then going back and getting in the pool in the afternoon and swimming for hours, and eating the right diet, not staying up late at night, all of the different things that he did. No one would ever discount what he did to be able to win those. And I think that was maybe we were starting to think about this about ourselves, is how do we have the same kind of drive and motivation to get what we want, like he was able to do that.
Right. So he was crystal clear on what mattered most to him, what his purpose in life was, and then he could reverse engineer that and create a life that supported reaching that end goal. And that's pretty much what we did. We figured out what was most important to us, and then we thought, okay, how do we reverse engineer this to make sure that this happens? And not only did that help us figure out, get clarity on what we most wanted in life, but then we were able to use those three goals as motivation for getting out of debt. Because I think a lot of people, they want to get out of debt. They make a decision to get out of debt. They find a strategy to get out of debt, and they start. But more often than not, they fail in the interim, because you actually have to make some hard choices. You have to do some unfun things.
Right.
So we're, like I said on this particular episode, we're very social creatures, but we had to dial back our going out and partying significantly. And it was so hard, especially after a week of work, going in and dealing with the 9 to 5 grind, to say, no, we can't go to that party on Friday, or no, we can't go to that happy hour. We wanted desperately to do that, but those were the very behaviors that helped get us into $51,000 in credit card debt. So much like probably Michael Phelps had to say no to certain parties and couldn't do certain things and had to miss holiday dinners and whatnot because he had to train regardless of the fact that it was a holiday. We had to make similar hard decisions. And so those 3 goals acted as the motivation for us to say, it's worth it. It's worth it. Staying in tonight is worth it. Not saying no to this invitation is worth it.
Yeah. And sometimes I think maybe the visualization of what it will feel like to get there, right? You can imagine that Michael Phelps, probably visualized himself not just winning the race, not touching the wall first. And you see athletes do this. Like when you're watching, especially competitive races, where you see the runner or the swimmer, they're standing there or they're waiting for, and they're going through it in their minds. That's why basketball players and football players, when you see them heading into the arenas, they oftentimes have their headphones on because they're focused on what it is that they really want. And what they want is they want that feeling of winning and the results of what they will get from winning.
And visualize it.
Yeah. Have you ever visualized what it would be like to not have any debt? What would it be like if you paid off all of your credit card debt? And I think that was a little bit of a motivator for us. So going back to that initial question of if you know what you want and you want it bad enough, you'll do almost anything to get it, right? You will do whatever it takes.
And to put that in a more gay term, to make it a more gay question, this is a question that David and I ask ourselves a lot, and especially when we were paying off our credit card debt. We would say, at the time we were living in Denver, we would ask ourselves, would we rather have the margarita here in Denver, or would we rather have the margarita in Puerto Vallarta? And invariably, the answer is we would much rather have the margarita in Puerto Vallarta. But that meant we would have to forego margaritas in Denver. It didn't mean we couldn't have any margaritas in Denver. And maybe more often than not, it meant we would have to have the margarita at home in Denver rather than at a restaurant or a bar.
I got pretty good at making margaritas.
Exactly. But I mean, there's a real life question. I mean, we would much rather go to Puerto Vallarta. So put that in give it a gay twist.
Yeah, but one of the analogies or stories I told in the podcast episode was the example of what children do when they want something, and the reason I share this is because I know this was something that I did, and my sister and I did this together sometimes. Was you would pick out. You wanted something, right? You wanted to go do something, or you wanted something to be purchased for you, and so you knew what you wanted, right? And you would pick out the parent who seemed like the most likely to say yes, right? Which parent would most likely say yes? And you would go to that parent hoping that they would say yes, so that you could then go to the parent that would most likely say no and say, so if dad is most likely to say no, we'd go to mom, and mom would say yes, and then we would go to dad and we would say, Dad, mom said yes, can we? Or we would go about it the other way. We would go to mom and say, Mom, if dad says yes, can we? And mom would say, sure, yeah, if your dad says yes. And then we would go to dad and we'd say, Dad, mom said, if you said yes, we can do this. What were we doing?
Pinning mom and dad against each other?
Well, yes,
Bastard
but
children.
we're being very conniving because we knew what we wanted, and we really, really tried to get what we wanted. I think that maybe we lose some of that as we get older when it's getting what we really want. Not the distractions of what we think we want, but the true things we want. The things like happiness, the things like financial security, the things like a great relationship, the things like feeling really good and physically fit. I'm not talking about being a gym bunny or having
God
a
bod.
God bod, right? I'm just talking about feeling really good and fit and healthy with our bodies. All of those kinds of, we know that all those kinds of things will really make us feel good. Why don't we have that same kind of tenacity and vigor to try to go out and get them?
Exactly. So our question to you is, regardless of whatever your financial goal is, whether you want to also get out of credit card debt, or you have credit card debt and you've never thought of it, but now this is an inspiration for you, or you want to save enough money for retirement or raise that credit score, or whatever your goals are, what is your why? What's most important to you? What are you going to use as your talisman to get you through the hard times, to keep you focused on getting to that end goal? What's your why? Please share your answer in the comments below, or continue the conversation with us in the Queer Money Facebook group. So thank you for joining us for another Queer Money follow-up. Here's your Queer Money follow-up takeaway from this episode. Subscribe to the Queer Money podcast at debtfreeguys.com/QM for Queer Money. Lastly, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and like I said, in the comments below or in the Queer Money Facebook group, continue the conversation and let us know what your why is. Thank you, and we will see you tomorrow.